Power Standard 9, author's choices in literature. So if you reflect back, remember, Power Standard 9 is all about how we analyze the decisions that an author makes in creating a story, and that these decisions, using different things like those 4 tricks we talked about: plot, setting, conflict, and theme, and then using devices like foreshadowing, time manipulation, pacing, flashbacks, using those different devices to build suspense within you, the reader. Remember, an author that writes a story is trying to entertain you. They're trying to keep you hooked and engaged, and they're trying to get you to think and to stay invested in the story. They want you to get in the car, aka the story, and stay for the entire trip. In order to do that, they have to use those 4 tricks and those tools like foreshadowing and irony and inferences and pacing and time manipulation to keep you invested. But one thing they definitely use is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is where the author is going to be dropping you clues like the lights suddenly flickered in the dark alley. Boom. That's foreshadowing. That's letting you know that something is about to happen. Or Monty gets in his car. He glances over to the gas gauge and realizes he is right above E. The sign in front of him says next gas station, 75 miles. Automatically, we have foreshadowing. And that foreshadowing creates suspense. That's that feeling of not knowing what's going to happen next in the story, so you want to keep reading. Now, an author uses plot, setting, conflict, and theme to keep you engaged, hooked, and interested. Then the author uses things like foreshadowing and pacing and time manipulation to create that suspense, which is going to keep you hooked. So as the story continues to build, the author is using suspense through the characters and through conflict to intensify that feeling of tension, that feeling of suspense. And that's what this Power Standard is about. All we're doing is taking the tools we know, the tricks that we know the author has in their arsenal, and then the devices they use with those tricks to keep us entertained, engaged, hooked, invested, and interested in the story. So let's read this text right here. The road wound this way and that as I drove through the fog. One of my headlights was out, and there was an eerie stillness in the forest. So right now, the trick that the author's using is the setting. He's given us an image of the setting. So it's fog. It's a windy road. Ooh, that's a little dangerous. One of my headlights is out. There's stillness. So automatically I have suspense. And now I realize the author is foreshadowing something is going to happen. They're giving me hints. The winding road, the fog, the headlights are out. All those are different hints. What is about to happen? Now, typically, a writer uses foreshadowing to signal to us, the reader, that there's trouble ahead. But they also use it to let us know that there's something important about the character. Reflect back to the clip from Despicable Me. We learned a lot about Gru. We learned a lot about Gru from that scene. So that was also the author using foreshadowing. So remember, foreshadowing is not just to let us know about bad things or trouble that's about to happen for our characters that we're invested in, but also to give us important information. Joel asks Nikki if she knew the man in the red tie. Man in the red tie. Okay, so we don't know his name, but we know he's a man and he's in a red tie. She said no. And at the time, he didn't think her response was important. So clearly there's something important about this man in the red tie. And then we have this. At the time, he didn't think her response was important. So that means now, later, it has to be. So if we kept that story going, the author's probably going to use flashback at some point to let us know who this man in the red tie is. So, which part of the following passage is most clearly an example of foreshadowing? So let's read this and pause me and read it, and then let's come back with the correct answer in a moment. So let's deconstruct it. The guy looked normal enough, medium height. So the author is giving us a physical description. He sat at a table in the back of the restaurant. As Sarah approached him with her pen and pad, "What can I get you?" she asked, smiling. "Nothing. I don't feel any tension or suspense building yet." The guy hadn't even opened his menu. "Coffee with no cream or sugar, nothing to eat. Thank you." Don't really see how that's dropping a hint or a clue. When Sarah leaned in to retrieve his menu, she caught a whiff of an animal scent. Then the man grabbed the menu with lightning speed, and Sarah noticed thick, dark hair on his hands. "I'll keep the menu, thanks." So she tried to lean in to get in his area, and she noticed an animal scent. That's when the pace all of a sudden starts quickening up. Notice how the pacing that the author using is just average. It's just kind of slow. Then all of a sudden, when. So when is one of those shifting, pacing words that when you see it, you know that the author is getting ready to quicken the pace, so you want to pay attention. So that is another pacing and foreshadowing kind of work hand in hand. So the answer to this question is this sentence right here. Let's try another one. Now, the next thing we want to talk about, we've already talked about foreshadowing. So that, remember, suspense is that feeling of not knowing what's going to happen next. It's that issue of dread. As a reader, we don't know everything that's going to happen, but we want to know. So suspense is that uncertainty, excitement, and apprehension. And remember, the author is going to use the trick of conflict and the devices of foreshadowing and pacing and time manipulation to help you build that suspense. Let's talk quickly about pacing. So pacing is when the author wants to create that suspense in you. Reflect back to a couple of seconds ago. We all of a sudden, everything was going really good, nice pace, and then when the author picked up the pace, so we knew something was about to happen. So sometimes the action can happen all in once. Not in the case in the previous example. Then all of a sudden things start happening. Then, so typically like that, when you want all the action to happen at once, you have short, choppy sentences like this to slow you down because it's raining. But if the author wants to delay the suspense, they may write longer sentences. And then all of a sudden you see when. So that's pacing, aka time manipulation. Conflict. Once again, writers use conflict between the characters to create suspense. The more drama, the more conflict, the more suspense. Reflect back to the stories that we made up and told in class. The main precursor or the main tricks the author was using was the characters and then also conflict. So let's read a couple of these. So go ahead and pause me and answer these questions. So let's look at these. So we have two that don't create suspense and two that do. So Carson Dale, she said as she stood outside the building. So clearly we see Carson Dale. She stood outside the building. So the building must be named Carson Dale. A moment later, that's one of those tense or shift pacing phrases. She peered around the corner expecting to see him. So this is foreshadowing, one, that Carson Dale is somebody important but it also uses pacing because we see the phrase a moment later. So we want to know who Carson Dale is. Let's look at the second one. At a stoplight, Gabriel took out his phone and he scrolled up and down for her text. So we know this her. Who is this her? What is his text? He's scrolling through his phone. Someone honked. So now suspense. We don't know what the text is. What text is it? Up and down, he scrolled. Where was it? So you see these short, choppy sentences. Someone honked. Up and down, repetition. That lets us know that he's frantic to find this text. And then someone honking in the back, beep, beep, is distracting him from it. Where was it? So when the author has these short, choppy sentences, they're trying to quicken the pace and also increase the suspense in you. Good stuff. So let's read this text and let's see how the author Can you find where the author is using foreshadowing in the passage to create the suspense? Pause me and answer. So, a formal dinner, but he strolled in with no tie or sports coat. Character. And clearly, he's not dressed appropriately. Just ripped blue jeans and a white tee. Shauna made a gesture in his direction. Did you read the invitation? No. Why not? Aren't you worried about the consequences? The boy smirked, wrinkling up his face like a mischievous cartoon character. So now we know he's mischievous. He smirked. He wasn't fazed by the fact he wasn't dressed appropriately. I have my own way of doing things. So the suspense, which is not really a big feeling of dread or trouble, but we do know that this boy is outside the box. He's a rebel. Reflect back to our archetypes. So he wonders what other rules he may break. So now we know that this character is going to be important for our narrator. So, last thing, let's read this passage from the story of Edgar Sawtelle and answer the question. How does foreshadowing create suspense in the passage below? So we have Edgar. It sounded so rational, the alternative so clear. So he nodded. So clearly there's something happening with Edgar. It would be much later before he realized they seduced themselves that night, seduced themselves into believing they understood all the costs and consequences of what they wanted. So they want something, and they think they've weighed everything out, that no mistake could equal what had already had happened. So they feel like the decision they made is a good one, and that nothing's going to happen, that their calm wasn't simply a veneer, and veneer just means a mask. So they're calm about everything. Everything's so rational and calm, but it would be much later before. So that is the moment where the author's foreshadowing that, hey, something is about to happen, something's going on. That's foreshadowing. All right, so remember, with suspense, the suspense builds as the story's conflicts develops and intensifies. So now the author is using the plot of the story to also intensify the suspense. So with conflict, we want to make sure we understand conflict could be any opposing struggle or force. So below is a passage in which prideful Owen, who doesn't skate very well, tries to cross a large frozen river. That's already foreshadowing off the gate. But notice how the suspense rises as the conflict through the plot progresses. So let's watch. Owen sped, gained speed by the second. He tapped his pocket where he kept his lucky Swiss Army knife, though he had no need for luck charms now, as there was a newfound swagger in every stride. Okay. He was nearing his goal, the far side of the Dawson River, his legs chugging like pistons as he imagined the dialers' faces. But just then, his right skate, look right there, but just then, that's automatic suspense. He flapped his arms. The ice toward the far shore was solid. It was breaking up only 50 yards away. Conflict. Man versus nature. Thinking quickly, he slid on the side, digging the good skate into ice in a shower of misty shavings. But when you see but, you know there's a shift. Mere moments later, in a long crackle and quick splash, Owen found himself flailing in the dark, rigid water, grabbing unsuccessfully at the smooth shelf. So we have different moments where the suspense is killing us. But the best part was when he mentioned that Swiss Army knife. He kept his luckies, he tapped, but he had no need for good luck. So now we get the foreshadowing. There's something important about that Swiss Army knife. He didn't need it, though. And then the greatest suspense is at its peak when we have the long crackle and quick splash. So an author has many different tools in their arsenal through plot, conflict, characters, conflict to help, and then foreshadowing that's going to help you build suspense. And then they use pacing and time manipulation in order to create the suspense in you to keep you invested, hooked, interested, and thinking about the text. See you later.